In this video, I want to talk about how as attackers we can capitalize on the defensive positioning of a player, cut off their rotates, and effectively net a free kill and increase our man advantage. So the scenario I'm going to propose is if a player is in VIP Lounge holding the VIP vault through DJ Booth, or perhaps the entry from DJ Booth and Hall of Fame. Whether this is a penthouse site or a hookah site isn't really relevant to the conversation. We're just going to focus on cutting out those rotates and then how we net the free kill. So where are the rotates? In order to trap the player in VIP Lounge, we would want to hold the VIP Lounge and hallway doorway, as well as the VIP Lounge and Hall of Fame doorway. If we can isolate these two doorways, then this player is stuck in VIP Lounge, and then we can actually execute a kill onto him. How do I think we should do this? My answer is 1 from the courtyard skylight. This is a really great way to hold the player in VIP Lounge because 1, we're outside the building, so it's a bit difficult for defenders to contest, and 2, we have a significant height advantage, which makes hitting that headshot all the more difficult. So a player from relative safety can hold this angle onto the VIP Lounge door without feeling any pressure from anyone trying to contest him, or the defender just has to land a crazy headshot. We want to hold this angle as passively as possible. We're only concerned about this rotation out. If we hold this more aggressive, then defenders have angles that they can get onto us from courtyard or luggage, and it's our responsibility just to hold the rotation that I've already specified from VIP into hallway. A lot of ranked players, what they'll do is they'll come up to the skylight and they'll kind of bait for a minute 30 or a minute. The thing is, if there's no pressure from your teammates to force any kind of rotation, then the only way that you net a free kill is if defenders make a crucial mistake, move too much, etc. So you're just kind of banking on the idea that a defender makes a mistake than there being any reason for a defender to make that rotation. There's no pressure for the defender to even move necessarily. My recommendation is only come to the skylight if there is some kind of design play that you and your teammates have decided on. Another possibility is, let's say your teammates are pushing from Aqua. Well, one of the possible flanks is from luggage, so you might want to hold the rotation in luggage. So now we need to solve for the Hall of Fame rotate. I'm going to propose 2 solutions, and one is clearly better than the other. The first solution is option A. The player holds from the window of VIP Lounge into Hall of Fame, and then the second option is B. The player holds from Hall of Fame into the VIP. Our primary concern is the barricade of the hookah lounge being torn down, a defender running out of hookah deck, and being able to kill our attackers holding this rotate on the DJ booth area. So we have a defender situated in VIP Lounge right by the TV. The rotate is already being cut off outside into the hallway, and we need to put an attacker holding the rotate out into Hall of Fame. Well, if I have option A for the attacker, then the attacker is holding the double door of VIP Lounge into Hall of Fame. But the biggest issue here is that his back is turned to a defender running out of hookah deck. And this flick, 135 degrees almost, is very difficult for a player to make. So it's not ideal in that sense. What is ideal is the fact that if the defender in his position by the TV decides to hop out of the big window here, we already have our crosshair trained for that potential monkey play. So it's very easy for the attacker to net a kill on a player who moves too much from this position. Alternatively, we have option B, which is definitely the suggested position, but there are some nuances to it. So the ideal way to hold this would be the way that I'm doing right now. We have this great double angle into the hookah area, or sorry, the VIP area. The important thing is that if a defender decides to hop out of the hookah deck and try to contest us, this is like about a 30-degree flick, very manageable. More importantly, we are facing the run out, and so we can contest it much easier, right? Not a ton of movement required for me to hit this shot. I do need to consider the angles that I'm giving the player inside of VIP, however. So an alternative way to hold this angle would be from much farther, but what we want to note is this 27-meter angle that the player has in VIP. Let's look at it from the defender's perspective. So as a defender, if I know the positioning of the attacker, what I could potentially do is crouch walk up to the window and try to get that shot onto the player there. Do we actually see where the bullet lands? Not really, but you can tell already that from those plants, or I was holding near the plants, right? I could potentially get a shot onto the attacker that's holding me there. Another important thing to think about is that if the defender decides to contest the player on option B, they have really one of two options. They can either, well, three options. The window, which we already talked about, or they can try to crouch walk up to the VIP doorway and then peek this very tight angle here. But as we already mentioned, as an attacker, I'm holding this axis here, axis X if you will. And so this should be a pretty easy shot considering they're in my crosshair already, now they're dead. The other option that a defender would have in this position is to try to wide the angle as much as possible. And once again, they're going to come across this axis X as I've defined, and we should, in theory, be able to land this headshot on them as they're peeking into us. There's never the case that the defender would be able to cross this axis here, axis X, and peek us from the other side. So when we hold the player, if we know that the player is in this corner over there, when we hold the player, we always train our crosshair onto the axis X as we defined, not the alternate axis of the hallway doorway. Hall of Fame doorway, sorry. Now, how do we push the player out of his position? We have two players cutting off the rotate out of VIP. We have them trapped. There's no rotates out of VIP, of course, because there's no hash to drop. There's really no rotations other than the two that we've cut off. One thing that we should talk about is, well, there could be a rotation that the defender could create. If this is perhaps a operator with impact grenades or even another defender that creates the rotation for that player, then the possible rotates that this player has are through the penthouse or maybe even hallway. And that kind of stuff needs to be called by the player who drones. So, two players cutting off rotates, one player droning. What is this player supposed to drone? They're supposed to drone whether there's any defensive utility that would make pushing this player more difficult. That is ADSs, barbed wire, Grismot mines, etc. The other thing is rotates. If this defender has a rotate, we need to know because that means that we might need another player in order to facilitate this pinch. For instance, if there's a rotate between penthouse and VIP lounge, perhaps we want a player to also go onto the penthouse window. That for sure locks this player in this position. The other thing too is if there's another defender, maybe in the Hall of Fame area, then that negates some of our options as attackers in order to push this player out of VIP. But let's pretend that there's no other defenders, there's no rotates, and we just have this player trapped in VIP. Then as attackers, how do we handle removing this player out of this position by the TV and VIP lounge? Well, we always default first to using utility, using our gun second. So one option, knowing that there's no player in Hall of Fame, no player in Penthouse that can contest our entry, is we prep a nade and grenade the player through the Hall of Fame doorway. The other option, and I think this is a little more risky, is we approach the window of VIP and grenade the player in that position. As we can see, this would certainly be a lethal kill. The problem with this is that we are pushing into the angle that the defender is most likely holding because they are, of course, cognizant of the fact that, hey, we're on DJ deck, I should be holding this angle. One thing I want to stress is that we never consider the idea of vaulting in through the window into VIP in order to kill the player in this position. Vaulting restricts our freedom of movement, and it's very important as attackers for us to have that freedom of movement in order to adapt to any variables that might have changed in the situation. The other thing to note is that if I hold position B, push into Hall of Fame, and then pre-fire the player in that spot, I'm still, through that entire movement, cutting off the one rotate that I'm responsible for. And that enables us to, one, have a player continue to drone for us to inform things like, right now he's prone, right now he's crouched, right now he's standing. And also other movement, i.e. he's widing over to the shelves, or he's prone behind the sofa, whatever. So one glaring weakness of this kind of execute that we're doing with 3 players is, what if a defender rotates from theater into penthouse in order to contest the entry of the attacker executing from Hall of Fame into VIP? The defender can hold a very passive angle onto the doorway and kill the player on the DJ booth as they peek into Hall of Fame, and that's something we want to avoid. One option, and it always comes down to just dedicating more resources, is to either use utility, say an air jab on this doorway here in theater and penthouse, or to have a player drop into bathroom and hold the theater doorway for us. Another option is to go on the rappel of the big window in penthouse. Of course, all of these considerations are very site dependent. If the site is penthouse and theater, for instance, going on the window rappel might be ideal. Not only is it a question of do you have the resources, but do you have the resources in the correct positions? If you, for instance, have Nomad on the coastline skylight, then Nomad needs to rotate over to Hall of Fame in order to air jab this spot on the doorway of penthouse and theater. If you have Sledge, for instance, on the coastline skylight, well, now you need to rotate them over to DJ booth in order to nade the player in VIP. So those are all things that the in-game leader need to be considering. 1, do we have the right resources? 2, do we have the resources in the right positions? Another thing too that I'll mention is, let's pretend there's like 3 ADSs here. Do we have flashbangs in order to remove that utility? This is again why droning is so important, because we can have the right resources, but maybe they're not all in the right positions. In the case where all 3 ADSs are positioned in this corner here, well, then we need to have 2 operators with flashbangs in order to clear those ADSs, and then 1 operator with nades in order to throw the nade and use all the utility that we have on hand. It might also be the case that because of the utility that we have, or because the defenders are using all this utility in one position, perhaps we just forego expending all that utility and we decide, you know, we have a player who will hit his shots, and instead of trying to even bother with throwing a nade in the doorway there, let's just have him pre-fire the player in VIP. These are all things that need to be determined through droning and also then shot called by the IGL. In conclusion, if you have a player isolated in a position through intel, whether during the prep phase, VOD review, droning, through the action phase, etc., what you want to do is you want to cut off the rotates out of that room, drone the utility in the room to inform the required operators in order to execute the player, default to utility first, peeking with gun second to minimize risk. A player cutting off the rotate should be the same player pushing the defender as they continue to hold the rotate, meaning that a defender can't move from his position. And it's very important to drone the position of the defender in order to net the free kill, because of course the defender can move from his position, change stance, and all of that needs to be relayed to the attacker who's pushing the defender. The last note I want to make is setup can be slow, but the execution should always be fast. It's okay if what you need to do is rotate players around. What's not okay is for you to execute very slowly and the position of the defender has changed dramatically in a way that doesn't allow you to take the 1v1 that you're setting up your one attacker to push the one defender and win in a manageable way. The reason why it's so important to execute quickly is another scenario is, let's say we knew the second floor was completely free and we still have the defender by the TV in VIP lounge. Well, we still have a player holding the Hall of Fame into VIP lounge angle and rotation cutoff, but instead we can move one of our attackers into the hallway. And what we can do now is when the player in DJ booth moves into Hall of Fame to peek the player in VIP, we can simultaneously have the player in hallway peek the player in VIP lounge. What this does is it creates a very difficult crossfire for the defender to respond to. They need to flick almost 90 degrees in order to hit both headshots. And it's just so difficult to do so when two players are shooting at you that more likely than not, we end up with the man advantage. If the player in Hall of Fame were to peek first, and somehow this player is able to net the frag on the player in Hall of Fame, and then after that, the player in Hallway peeks, well, there's a chance that the player in VIP flicks onto that player's head and is actually able to get a 2K instead of us gaining a man advantage. So that's why it's so important to set up slowly if time affords it, to coordinate, and then to execute quickly. The other issue is this player can potentially move between fragging out one player and then onto the other. He might have killed the player in Hall of Fame from behind or right next to TV, but then he might reposition closer to the shelves and the player in the hallway wouldn't be able to frag as easily.